Nathan Cross stared down at the motionless woman sprawled across the white snow, blood from her forehead wound staining the pristine ice beneath her. She opened her eyes slowly, her pale lips moving to form barely audible whispers. Her expensive backpack lay partially open beside her, revealing the corner of something that didn't look like standard climbing equipment. This girl must be from a wealthy, upper-class family. Nathan felt the skin-cutting cold from the mountain wind. But there was another kind of cold, a strange sensation in his gut as he looked into her eyes. He reached out to lift her up, unaware that in the next few hours he would have to question everything he was seeing thoroughly to save this strange girl. But as she gripped his arm tightly, Nathan couldn't know that this encounter was anything but accidental. The Colorado peaks stretched endlessly around them, their jagged silhouettes cutting sharp lines against the gray afternoon sky. Nathan had been working search and rescue in these mountains for 3 years now, long enough to recognize the signs of someone who had been exposed to the elements for hours rather than days. This woman's condition was serious but not critical. Her expensive Gore-Tex jacket and professional-grade climbing boots suggesting she had come prepared for the harsh conditions that could turn deadly without warning. "My name is Veronica," she whispered as Nathan checked her pulse, her voice carrying a refined accent that spoke of private schools and country clubs. Veronica Kane. I was climbing alone when the storm hit. My satellite phone stopped working, and I must have taken a wrong turn trying to find shelter. Her story sounded plausible enough, the kind of mistake that claimed inexperienced climbers every season despite their expensive equipment and overconfidence in technology. Nathan carefully examined her injuries while she spoke, noting the head wound that had bled significantly but appeared to have clotted naturally. Her pupils responded normally to light, suggesting no serious concussion, though her skin temperature indicated the early stages of hypothermia. What bothered him wasn't her medical condition but something harder to define, a quality in her voice that seemed too controlled for someone who had just survived what should have been a terrifying ordeal. "We need to get you warmed up and get that head wound properly cleaned," Nathan said, beginning the process of securing her to his emergency transport sled. "My cabin is about 2 miles down the mountain. Can you tell me if you're experiencing any pain besides your head?" As he worked, he noticed details that didn't quite fit the narrative she had provided. Her fingernails were too clean for someone who had been climbing and scrambling over rocks. Her equipment showed no signs of the wear that would be expected from a serious fall. The trek down to Nathan's emergency shelter took 45 minutes through terrain that required careful navigation even under ideal conditions. Veronica remained conscious throughout the journey, occasionally making small talk that revealed an impressive knowledge of the local area for someone who claimed to be visiting from out of state. She knew the names of peaks that weren't marked on standard hiking maps, mentioned trails that were used primarily by locals and experienced guides rather than recreational climbers. Nathan's cabin was one of several emergency shelters maintained by the Search and Rescue Service, stocked with medical supplies, emergency communications equipment, and enough provisions to shelter stranded hikers for several days if necessary. The structure was simple but well insulated, designed to provide warmth and safety rather than comfort. As Nathan helped Veronica inside and began the process of treating her injuries, he noticed how quickly she assessed the layout of the space, her eyes moving systematically from the radio equipment to the supply cabinets with the efficiency of someone conducting a tactical evaluation. "You live out here alone?" Veronica asked as Nathan cleaned the wound on her forehead, her tone casual, but her attention focused on his responses with an intensity that seemed disproportionate to normal conversation. It must get lonely, especially during the winter months when fewer people come up here. Do you have family nearby? The questions felt like an interview disguised as small talk, each inquiry designed to gather specific information about his personal situation and potential vulnerabilities. Nathan had learned long ago to trust his instincts, a skill that had kept him alive during 2 tours of duty in Afghanistan before he returned home to raise his daughter as a single father. Something about Veronica's behavior triggered the same internal warning system that had alerted him to roadside bombs and ambush situations in hostile territory. She was too alert for someone recovering from trauma, too interested in details that shouldn't matter to someone focused on her own survival and recovery. "I have a daughter," Nathan replied carefully, not mentioning that 8-year-old Katie was currently staying with his sister in town while he completed this rescue mission. "She's the reason I do this work. Every person I help get home safely is someone else's child, someone else's family member." He watched Veronica's reaction closely, noting how her expression softened in what appeared to be calculated sympathy rather than genuine emotion. As the evening progressed, Nathan found himself increasingly uncomfortable with aspects of Veronica's story that didn't align with his experience and training. Her climbing gear was expensive, but showed no signs of serious use. Her hands lacked the calluses that would be expected from someone who spent significant time rock climbing, and her knowledge of mountaineering terminology was extensive, but somehow theoretical rather than practical. When she thought he wasn't looking, he caught glimpses of alertness and calculation that contradicted her pose as a helpless accident victim. The first concrete evidence that something was seriously wrong came when Nathan was organizing the contents of Veronica's backpack to dry out items that had been damaged by snow and moisture. Hidden beneath carefully arranged climbing equipment wrapped in waterproof material, he discovered a compact pistol that definitely wasn't standard gear for recreational mountaineering. The weapon was clean, well-maintained, and equipped with a suppressor that suggested professional rather than civilian use. Nathan's military training kicked in immediately, his mind racing through possibilities and scenarios while maintaining an outward appearance of calm routine. He palmed the weapon without alerting Veronica to his discovery, slipping it into his own gear while continuing to sort through her belongings as if nothing unusual had been found. The presence of the gun transformed his assessment of the situation from potential medical emergency to active threat, though he still couldn't determine exactly what kind of danger he was facing. "Is everything okay with my equipment?" Veronica asked from across the cabin, her voice carrying a note of concern that could have been interpreted as worry about damaged gear or anxiety about Nathan's discovery. "I'm hoping my camera survived the fall. I was documenting the climb for a travel blog, and I'd hate to lose those photos." The explanation sounded rehearsed, the kind of cover story that would account for electronic equipment and justify her presence in the mountains. Nathan spent the night in a state of hypervigilance that reminded him of combat deployments, sleeping lightly while monitoring Veronica's movements and maintaining access to the concealed weapon he had taken from her pack. Several times during the night, he caught her moving around the cabin with a stealth and purpose that contradicted her claims of injury and exhaustion. She seemed to be conducting her own assessment of the space, testing the locks on supply cabinets and examining the radio equipment with professional interest. The next morning brought clear skies and the opportunity to establish radio contact with the outside world, But when Nathan attempted to use the emergency communication system, he discovered that several key components had been subtly sabotaged during the night. The damage was sophisticated enough to disable the equipment while appearing to be the result of electronic failure rather than deliberate interference. This confirmed Nathan's growing suspicion that Veronica was not who she claimed to be, and that her presence in the mountains was part of a larger operation. The radio seems to be malfunctioning, Nathan told Veronica, not mentioning his discovery of the sabotage. We might need to hike down to the main road to get help, though that could take most of the day given your condition. He watched her reaction carefully, noting a flash of satisfaction that she quickly covered with appropriate disappointment and concern. I hate to be more trouble than I already am, Veronica replied, her performance of helpless gratitude becoming more obviously artificial as Nathan became more alert to the inconsistencies in her behavior. But I'm feeling much stronger today. Maybe we could try to make it partway down the mountain, and you could go ahead to get help while I wait somewhere safe. The suggestion would effectively separate them, giving her freedom to operate while removing Nathan as a potential obstacle to whatever she had planned. Nathan realized that he was facing a sophisticated operative who had used the appearance of being a victim to gain access to the emergency shelter system, and possibly to him specifically. The sabotage of the radio equipment suggested that she wanted to maintain isolation and control over their situation, though her ultimate objectives remained unclear. His military experience told him that the best strategy was to appear cooperative while gathering more information about her real purpose and capabilities. That sounds like a reasonable plan, Nathan agreed, beginning preparations for what he knew would be a dangerous game of deception and misdirection. Let me gather some supplies for the hike, and we can head out whenever you feel ready. As he moved around the cabin, Nathan palmed additional items that could serve as weapons or tools, preparing for the possibility that their journey down the mountain would involve considerably more danger than Veronica was pretending to expect. The hike began peacefully enough, with Veronica maintaining her pose as a grateful rescue victim, while Nathan led them along trails that he knew better than anyone else in the region. But as they descended toward lower elevations, Nathan began to notice signs that they were not alone in the wilderness. Footprints in soft soil that were too fresh to have been made by previous hikers. Broken vegetation that suggested recent passage by people trying to move quietly through dense forest areas. Are there other rescue teams working in this area? Veronica asked, her tone casual, but her body language tense with alertness. I thought I heard voices earlier, but maybe it was just the wind in the trees. Nathan recognized the question as an attempt to gather intelligence about potential complications to whatever operation was unfolding, and he realized that the situation was far more complex than a simple case of mistaken identity or random criminal activity. The truth began to emerge when they encountered a man in military-style clothing who emerged from concealment with the confidence of someone who had been expecting their arrival. He was armed with professional equipment and moved with the discipline of trained personnel, suggesting that Veronica was part of a larger organization with significant resources and capabilities. Nathan's worst fears were confirmed when the man addressed Veronica by a different name and spoke about operational parameters that had nothing to do with mountain climbing or travel blogging. Status report, Vera, the man said, using military communications protocol that revealed the professional nature of their relationship. The primary target has been secured, and secondary objectives are proceeding on schedule. Are there any complications we need to address before moving to the next phase? Nathan realized that he had been identified as a specific target rather than a random rescuer, suggesting that his involvement in this situation was not the coincidence it had originally appeared to be. Veronica's transformation was immediate and complete, her pose of vulnerability disappearing as she adopted the bearing and speech pattern of someone accustomed to command authority. The asset has been cooperative and appears to have the skill set we discussed, she told her colleague, speaking about Nathan as if he were not present. We should proceed with the recruitment protocol and determine his willingness to participate in the larger operation. Zeta. Nathan realized that he had been manipulated from the beginning, drawn into a situation designed to evaluate his potential usefulness to an organization whose purposes remained mysterious but were clearly not legitimate. The revelation that his rescue of Veronica had been orchestrated as part of a larger plan forced Nathan to reevaluate everything that had happened since he first found her in the snow. Her injuries had been real, but not accidental. Her equipment failures had been staged to create plausible reasons for distress calls that would bring specific rescue personnel to her location. Nathan began to understand that his reputation and skills had made him a target for recruitment by people who needed someone with his particular combination of military training and local knowledge. What kind of operation are we talking about? Nathan asked, playing along with their assumptions while gathering information that might help him understand the scope of what he was facing, and why me specifically. There are other former military personnel in this area with similar backgrounds and capabilities. He needed to know whether this was about his individual skills or whether he had been selected for reasons connected to his past service or current circumstances. The answer came from Veronica herself, whose transformation from helpless victim to operational commander was complete and chilling in its implications. We've been monitoring your activities for several months, Cross. Your military record shows exactly the kind of capabilities we need for a specific operation, and your current situation makes you an ideal candidate for recruitment. No close family ties except for your daughter, no significant financial resources, no career prospects that would compete with what we're offering. Nathan realized that his entire life had been analyzed and assessed as part of their recruitment strategy. The mention of his daughter Katie sent ice through Nathan's veins, a reminder that his choices would affect not just his own safety, but the well-being of the only person who truly mattered to him. The implied threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Cooperation would be rewarded, while resistance might result in consequences that extended beyond his own situation. Nathan understood that he was facing people who had the resources and ruthlessness to follow through on such threats, making this far more serious than a simple criminal recruitment attempt. The operation involves the recovery of assets that were taken from our organization by a former associate, Veronica explained, her voice now carrying the crisp authority of someone accustomed to briefing personnel on sensitive missions. We need someone with your specific skill set to help us locate and retrieve these assets, which are currently being held in a secure facility that requires both technical expertise and tactical capabilities to access successfully. Nathan realized that he was being recruited for what amounted to a military-style assault on a defended position. The location of the operation, when Veronica finally revealed it, sent shockwaves through Nathan's understanding of what he was facing. The target was a private compound in the mountains of Montana that Nathan recognized from intelligence briefings he had received during his military service, a facility that was rumored to house a rescue operation for victims of human trafficking. The realization that Veronica and her organization were involved in human trafficking transformed Nathan's assessment of the situation from dangerous to morally urgent. Nathan's mind raced as he processed the implications of what he had learned. The organization that had recruited him was not just criminal, but was involved in one of the most heinous forms of criminal activity imaginable. The assets they wanted to recover were almost certainly human beings, victims who had been rescued from their trafficking operation and were now being sheltered in the Montana facility. Nathan realized that he was being asked to participate in re-victimizing people who had already suffered unimaginable trauma. The personal dimension of the situation became even more devastating when Veronica mentioned details about the Montana facility that revealed a connection to Nathan's own past. The operation that had rescued the trafficking victims had been led by Jake Mitchell, Nathan's former partner and closest friend from their military service together. Jake had been killed 6 months ago, under circumstances that had been officially classified as an accident, but which Nathan had always suspected involved foul play related to his anti-trafficking work. "Your friend Mitchell was quite effective at disrupting our operations," Veronica said, her tone suggesting admiration tinged with regret. "Unfortunately, he became too much of a liability to allow him to continue his interference. The assets he recovered represent a significant financial loss to our organization, and we need someone with comparable skills to help us reclaim what was taken." Nathan realized that Jake's death had not been accidental, and that he was now being recruited to undo his friend's final mission. The emotional impact of learning that Jake had been murdered by the same organization that was now trying to recruit him was almost overwhelming, but Nathan forced himself to maintain the appearance of cooperation, while his mind worked frantically to develop a strategy for dealing with the situation. He needed to find a way to extract himself and protect Katie while also preventing Veronica's organization from recovering the trafficking victims that Jake had died to save. The tactical situation became even more complex when Veronica revealed that one of the victims currently sheltered in the Montana facility was Jake Mitchell's own daughter, Sarah, who had been missing for 5 years before Jake finally located her through his anti-trafficking work. Nathan realized that his former partner had been fighting a deeply personal battle against the organization that had destroyed his family, and that Nathan was now being asked to participate in re-victimizing his friend's child. "Sarah Mitchell has been particularly difficult to replace," Veronica continued, apparently unaware of the emotional bombshell she had just detonated. She had been trained for specialized service and represented a significant investment in time and resources. Recovering her would send an important message to other facilities that might consider interfering with our operations. Nathan realized that Sarah had been not just a victim, but had been specifically groomed and trained for purposes that he could barely bring himself to contemplate. The knowledge that Sarah was alive, but in continued danger, provided Nathan with the motivation he needed to move beyond shock and begin developing a concrete plan for action. He could not allow Veronica's organization to reclaim Jake's daughter, regardless of the personal cost or the threats they had made regarding Katie's safety. Nathan understood that he was facing an enemy that would stop at nothing to achieve their objectives, but he also knew that he possessed skills and knowledge that could be turned against them if he was careful and strategic in his approach. The remainder of their journey down the mountain became a complex psychological game as Nathan pretended to consider their recruitment offer while actually gathering intelligence about their operational structure, personnel, and capabilities. Veronica seemed confident that she had successfully manipulated him into cooperation, apparently believing that the combination of financial incentives and implied threats would be sufficient to secure his participation in their planned assault on the Montana facility. Nathan learned that the organization operated as a network of semi-independent cells, each specializing in different aspects of the trafficking operation, but coordinated through a central command structure that maintained strict operational security. Veronica commanded one of the tactical units responsible for asset recovery and elimination of threats to the organization, while other cells handled recruitment, transportation, and client services. The scope and sophistication of their operation was far beyond what Nathan had initially imagined. The timeline for the Montana operation was aggressive, with deployment scheduled for the following week during a period when the facility would be operating with reduced security personnel. Veronica's intelligence suggested that the rescue facility housed approximately 20 victims who had been recovered from various trafficking operations, along with a small staff of counselors and security personnel who were not expected to offer significant resistance to a well-planned assault. As they reached the main road where transportation was waiting to take them to the organization's staging area, Nathan realized that he had reached the point where he would need to make a definitive choice about his course of action. Continuing with the recruitment process would give him access to more detailed intelligence about their plans and capabilities, but it would also put him deeper into their operational structure and make it more difficult to extract himself if the situation became untenable. The decision was made for him when Veronica received a radio transmission that changed the entire dynamic of their relationship. "Control to Vera, we have a problem with the primary asset," came the voice through her concealed communications equipment. "Intelligence suggests that Cross may have a personal connection to the Mitchell operation that was not identified in our preliminary assessment. Recommend immediate reassessment of recruitment viability." Nathan realized that his connection to Jake had been discovered and that his value as a potential recruit had been compromised. Veronica's demeanor shifted immediately from confident recruiter to wary operative as she processed the implications of the transmission. Nathan could see her re-evaluating their entire interaction through the lens of this new information, searching for signs that he had been deceiving her about his willingness to cooperate. The careful balance of trust and manipulation that had characterized their relationship was collapsing as both parties recognized that their true objectives were fundamentally incompatible. "It seems there are some aspects of your background that weren't fully disclosed during our initial assessment," Veronica said, her hand moving subtly towards the concealed weapon that Nathan had not yet revealed he had discovered and relocated. "Perhaps we should have a more detailed conversation about your relationship with Jake Mitchell and your knowledge of his activities before his unfortunate accident." Nathan realized that the pretense of recruitment was ending and that he was transitioning from potential asset to immediate threat in their operational calculations. The confrontation that followed would determine not just Nathan's immediate survival, but the fate of the trafficking victims whose rescue had cost Jake Mitchell his life. Nathan understood that he was facing an enemy with superior numbers and resources, but he also knew that his military training and intimate knowledge of the local terrain gave him advantages that could be exploited if he was smart and ruthless enough to use them effectively. The mountain wilderness that had been the setting for Veronica's elaborate deception would now become the battlefield where Jake's legacy and Sarah's future would be decided. As weapons were drawn and positions taken, Nathan felt the familiar calm that had sustained him through combat operations in Afghanistan settling over his mind like a protective shield. He had spent 3 years trying to build a peaceful life for himself and Katie, but the war had finally followed him home to Colorado's mountains. The question now was whether his skills had remained sharp enough to protect the innocent and honor the sacrifice of his fallen friend, or whether Veronica's organization would succeed in reclaiming the victims that Jake had died to save. The sound of gunfire echoing across the mountain peaks would signal the beginning of a battle that would test everything Nathan had learned about survival, sacrifice, and the price of standing against evil in a world where good people too often stood alone against overwhelming odds. But as he took cover behind the granite outcropping where he had first encountered Veronica, Nathan knew that some fights were worth the risk, and some causes were worth dying for, especially when the alternative was allowing monsters to reclaim their prey.